One's life begins to change when their desires transform into concrete actions. You're listening to the Desire to Be podcast, where your desires for your life and relationships become your mastery. I'm your host, Devora Goldberg, and thank you for joining. Welcome to another episode of the Desire to Be podcast. I'm really excited about today's episode. Today I'm speaking with Eli Nash, who is the host of the #1 podcast, the Search for More podcast. He is also the founder of the House of More. Welcome, Eli, to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Eli, a lot of people consider you a trailblazer in the topics that you discuss on your podcast. Why do you think so?
Why do I think they consider me a trailblazer? I don't think that I talk about new topics. It's obviously these topics now and In Search of More, not the first time that I've spoken. This is more consistent, but I kind of cut my teeth speaking about child sex abuse in the Orthodox communities and then talking about porn addiction. And while I wasn't necessarily the first person to talk about it, there was something about either the way I did it or who I am that made it feel more mainstream. And the same is true with the podcast. So I don't think I'm talking about anything new, but for whatever reason, it feels more mainstream when I talk about it.
I think that as a podcast host, you have to be relatable to your audience. So even if, like you said, it's a topic that other people may be discussing it, but if they relate to you, the way you're asking the question, the way your guest is responding, the stories that they bring up, then if they relate to that, then you've kind of hit a button with them.
In terms of the guest or in terms of the audience?
In terms of the audience.
In terms of the audience, yeah. Kind of what gives me permission to speak is my personal story. So when I speak, I'll usually interweave a lot of that as well, which I don't find that common with many people who I listen to. It's one of the reasons why I chose to speak, is say, okay, I'm willing to share my personal story. So I don't just talk about child sex abuse. I shared my personal story, and it doesn't only become my personal story, but because I've shared my personal story, many people have shared their personal stories with me as well. So it ends up being very personal in nature, the podcast.
Yeah. It's been some years since you first came out with your story. Do you feel you're still speaking about it? People want to hear about it?
I don't talk too much about the child sex abuse, only like as a reference that it got me speaking. It's not a part of my story that I identify strongly with today. It almost feels like a less important part of my story. As I've gotten to peel it apart more, it feels like a less important part of my story. Even porn addiction, I don't speak about so much, but a lot of people who listen to me and who reach out to me, that's their connection with me, is, hey, you spoke about something that it was so hard for me to speak about. So while I don't feel like I talk about it that much, people feel like I do. So it seems to resonate with people, that message. I think a lot of people are struggling with it, porn addiction. It's a big one.
It's a big one, and it's a topic which is, as you know, really shoved inside the closet. So even though it's not a big part of your story now, as you identify with it, but when you started speaking about it, it became an anchor point for anyone to come back to that story and realize, hey, this is something I can talk about. This is not a struggle that it's only my own. Other people have it, and this is how they have come out of it. So it's just out there in the world for people to benefit from and for them to start their healing journey.
Yes.
What has been your most popular topic on your podcast and has garnished the most positive response from your audience?
I don't know if there's one. Certainly psychedelics is like anytime something is a little controversial or taboo or something like that, it gets a little bit more attention. So I've heard a lot about that. Like a lot of people either have questions or were introduced to it through it or have started their journey and now they feel they started their journey maybe in, okay, no one can know about this, and they hear me talking about it publicly, so this became a space for those conversations to happen amongst themselves more comfortably. So psychedelics is certainly one, but even a lot of the Jewish stuff I talk about, I think seems to connect with people. I share from where I'm at, so if I'm learning something, I'll talk about it, and Judaism has become a deeper and deeper part of my life, not just in the past, but in the present, and people seem to connect to that.
Yeah. I want to talk now about the House of More and the breath work that you do. You told me previously that you started your breath work journey because someone had introduced you to it. Tell us about that time, that experience when you didn't know much about it before, then you experienced it, and what that opened up for you.
So in terms of the House of More, just on that, the House of More is something that we launched recently, kind of an offshoot of In Search of More, which is a space that allows for different kind of events, often very connected to the podcast. So I'll talk about breathwork. There are breathwork ceremonies there, but it's not only breathwork. There's men's retreats, there's women's retreats, there's cold plunges, all sorts of stuff that are going on there. We make it available for facilitators to reach out to us if they have different ideas. So some people use it for one-on-one sessions. Some people, there's a therapist who's using it for a group therapy session. So all sorts of stuff will happen there and will continue to happen there. That's the House of More. In terms of my own journey with breathwork, there's kind of two parts to it. Is one, I was going through a difficult period in business about 7 or 8 years ago, and someone introduced me to a coach. I knew I needed someone in my corner, and he presented himself as a performance coach. And what kind of wrapped his coaching practice was breathwork. But it was a different kind of breathwork than the transformational breathwork that a lot of people are talking about today. This individual, the coach who I worked with, was trained by Dan Brule. Dan Brule is someone I had on the podcast. So Dan's idea of breathwork is much more broad than 3-hour transformational breathwork sessions. He's got a breath for everything, waking up and going to sleep and focusing and concentrating and relaxing. He's a student of the breath, a master of the breath. Like, that's his world. And the way this coach worked was every session began with some breath work, even if it was 5 or 10 minutes. Hey, before we're going to go in, let's just do a little breathing. And then oftentimes punctuated during the session was, hey, something comes up, let's breathe through this. And then he'd give me breaths to work on for, in between sessions. But they were always 5, 10, 15-minute style breath works. Once or twice we did longer breath works, but I didn't have that transformational breathwork experience till a couple years later when a friend of mine mentioned that he was going to a session with Christian de la Huerta, who's also a guy we had on the podcast and who's been at the House of More regularly. And he's the first person I worked with on the transformational breathwork experiences, which is more those 2 or 3 hour sessions with, fair amount of preparation, good amount of breathing, 30 minutes to an hour plus of breathing, and then kind of processing through that. And those have, they call it transformational breathwork, but almost there's the possibility of psychedelic-like experiences or massive releases. So I've become attracted to that and talk about that. I think that every therapist should be using breathwork in their practice in some way.
How do you think, as a general public, we can become better in our lives and maybe even make society better if we make breathwork part of our lives?
When I sat with Dan, what he talks about is that every emotional state we have has a breath that correlates to it. If we're in fear, we have a breath that correlates to that. If we're in anger, we have a breath that correlates to that. So what he posits is that if it can start with the emotion and then the breath, then you can do the reverse. Like, kind of reverse engineer it, go with the breath and then the emotion. So in other words, in order to be angry, you kind of have to be like, right? Like that kind of breath. So if I'm feeling angry, could I just go into a more relaxed breath pattern and then that emotion will be worked through? So that's kind of what breathwork offers, is a very accessible way of regulating emotions, centering, and obviously with transformational breathwork, actually processing very, very deep traumas. I do them regularly now, and each time they're like, wow, that was a huge deal.
They uncover something every time.
Sometimes it could be something about the past or the present, but something's going to happen. Something's going to shift. There's going to be, the way I understand it is we have a lot of energy moving through us at all times. There's constantly energy moving through us, and the breath is kind of like that conduit or that vehicle for it. So when you get it moving, especially in the transformational breathwork patterns, then maybe some energy that got stuck will get processed through, or maybe an energy that's there that could be activated and strengthened and, harnessed more could come up. So it could become anything. It doesn't have to be a past trauma. It could walk out of a session ready to take on the world.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Like I said, I'm going to be starting my own breathwork session soon, and I'm excited to go on that journey. You offer these breathwork and other modalities during your retreats. Why do you think that now people are more open to attending retreats and going on this healing journey versus, let's say, 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think it happens with a lot of things where it kind of starts on the fringes, on the extremes, and then it works its way in. So what happened was, I think previously the thought process was that if someone's life was relatively functional, they're okay. They don't have trauma.
Right.
And it was just the people on the far extremes that had to pay attention to the stuff. Oh, you're severely addicted to something? Okay, you need help. You might have trauma. Or you're gambling like crazy, or your relationship is one relationship after the next is falling apart, or you've been through some severe abuse or physical trauma. Okay, now you need healing. You go and get it. And what we're finding is that no, we all have it. Like we all have stuff to work through. And slowly, as that message gets lit up for more and more people, I think the way it happens, if you look at it in a small way, like for example, in my case, I went through sexual abuse, like I mentioned, and then afterwards I found that I was addicted to pornography and other sexual behaviors, which prevented me from having a relationship, right? So I kind of got forced in to the work. I had a choice, but not that much of a choice. As I went into it, now I'm bringing my mother into therapy sessions, my dad into therapy sessions. I'm starting to recognize things in my siblings that, yeah, maybe I was the one who was sexually abused, but we both were raised in a home that allowed for the conditions of sexual abuse to happen and for the child not to talk about it. So while I experienced the symptom of that, my brothers and sisters were in that same pot. And as you start bringing it back to them, it's like, oh, wow, I have something to work through as well. And then that message starts just getting further and further out. And I think that's what's happening is that people touch it, they experience it, and they find that, oh, there's some relief here that I can have. There's some more purpose that I can find through this work, and it's downhill from there.
Yeah.
The Desire to Be podcast is taking sponsors for upcoming episodes. If you have a business that you'd like to advertise, if you have a product that you'd like to advertise, this is the platform to do it on. It will reach all my audience members, giving you lots of great exposure. Or maybe you just want to sponsor an upcoming show and support the Desire to Be podcast. If you're interested in sponsorship or advertising, reach out to me on either LinkedIn or on Instagram. You'll find me under my name, Devorah Goldberg. Thank you again for listening.
And there's this big trend now to be vulnerable. Open yourself and be vulnerable. So for some people, they're like, yeah, I'm going to come out there on social media and I'll tell everyone my story. And some people are like, no, I want to keep it to myself. And even going to a retreat and experiencing what people experience, it requires a certain sense of vulnerability, even if it's just with 5, 10, 15 people. But it's opening oneself up to experience something larger than themselves.
Yeah, oftentimes to be seen, right? To be truly seen. A lot of us have masks we've put on in one way or another, and we get attached to those. And what a retreat often allows for is to be seen, to see others truly and to be seen. So we can see someone else without their mask. We're just like, oh, okay, this person is like me. And there's a struggle there, right, behind their mask. Or there's something going on behind their mask. And then it gives us permission as well to let the mask down, And the retreats I think you're referring to are the Adama retreats that I've been leading with Mayor Kay. We've done a couple of those. We have another one coming up at the end of March, and you see it through the process, like through the weekend. There's kind of that nachshan, right? That guy who's jumps in first for whatever reason and says, okay, I'm going to, put something difficult for me on the table that I can work through. And once they do, everyone else sees that. I don't know if you've heard the saying, vulnerability is something we hate seeing in ourselves but love seeing it in others. So when we see it in someone else, we're like, wow, like that was so powerful. That was so amazing that guy was able to do that. And it gives permission for everyone else. We can't control that part of it, right? And the retreat is that first person who goes in. And it's like, okay, like when is it going to happen? When is that guy just going to jump in? And once that first person does, you see from there, like,
it's a spiral effect.
Yeah, it connects. It's like, hey, I want that too. I want that release. I want that feeling. I want to be seen. I want,
Do you have any stories that you can share of someone's life that was completely transformed after going to one of your retreats? Don't mention any names.
But no,
you don't have to be that vulnerable.
Right, no. Well, first of all, the retreats have been great for me, right? I've found a lot of benefits in the retreats themselves. It's the first time in anything I've done with healing that I've charged for it. And previously it was like, okay, I don't need the money, thankfully. I'm okay. I have a business. I don't need to make the money here. But for the retreats, it felt like, okay, this is an appropriate exchange. And what are you going to have? Everyone come if you make it free? So people had to pay. And because they paid, I couldn't go to this normal excuse that I didn't realize I was using was, hey, I'm just doing this guy a favor. Like I don't have to fully be in this, right? So someone calls me and I could respond or not respond. There was no commitment. Mm-hmm. And here it was like, no, these guys took off a weekend from their families. They spent money. They often flew here, right? This is a pretty big deal. And I got to make sure that I come fully, that I'm fully engaged and fully present. And it forced a level out of me that's been great. And I'm seeing it translate into other areas of my life. In terms of a change, there was one individual who, I don't know why I'm thinking of this story. Maybe it's not the most profound, but it's a cool story. So what I noticed from him when he came was like he was very, very, very talkative. Mm-hmm. Like extremely talkative, like talking to everyone, talking to this person, that person, that person. And it came across as something between a friendliness and a neediness, right? Depending on how far it was pushed. But it took a little while to realize what was actually going on. And what I saw it as was a defense mechanism to receive what's going on in the environment. Mm-hmm. If I'm speaking, I never need to put anything out. There's this concept in kashrus, right, in kosher, that we don't eat blood, right? So you have the salting period. Mm-hmm. And if you ever watch when they salt meat, so after the cow is killed and they slice up the different parts of meat that are kosher, they take the slabs of meat and they cover it in salt. Mm-hmm. And the salt, they say, draws the blood out. But if you see that process, the meat is soaking in the blood at the same time. So how is it not kosher, right? This same blood is not kosher, and here it is, while the salt is drawing it out, the meat is still in the blood. So the principle is that because it's emitting something, it's not absorbing anything, right? So we're putting something out, so we're not taking, can't do both at the same time. Okay. So the salt is forcing it to emit the blood, and because it's emitting blood, it's not absorbing blood. Got it. So it was kind of the same principle with this individual. He was emitting the whole time, so he was never forced to actually be present in the moment and receive from anyone else in the room. And it took time, because you can notice that, but to share that with someone and for them not to get defensive, you have to build up a fair amount of trust with a person. But eventually we were able to point it out to him. It's like, hey, all of this communication, you realize it's just a defense mechanism to avoid being present and receive what anything has to say. Like, you talk, but you'll never listen. And he swallowed hard when he heard the feedback, but it was on point. And since then, I've heard from him, and actually from his wife as well, that there's been a major shift in him and his home.
Wow.
Right. Like, it seemed to be something that was probably impacting him in every area of his life, just an inability to be present and to receive from anyone else. And that meant receiving, the truth is that meant receiving everything. It wasn't just receiving, it was the negative, but he also wasn't able to receive love and compassion and friendship and anything else because of that probably fear of receiving. He probably received too much junk from some other people, so he just went full into a piece of meat emitting instead of absorbing.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating how we have tendencies in life. We have personalities, and they tend to be ours, but if you uncover it, not in the sense of therapy and talking about it, but if you go deep within with this breathing, it seems like it just, the breath work actually uncovers something within you that you didn't even know was necessarily a problem, right?
Right. It's oftentimes, what's the intention behind it?
Yeah.
It's not what we're doing, but what's the intention behind it? Like they say about learning Torah, right? You can learn Torah with a lot of ego. I want to learn so I know more than the next person. So it's are you learning Torah or are you feeding your ego? Right? So we can do things, but the intention behind it is much more important than what we're actually doing.
Absolutely. On my podcast, the Desire to Be podcast, I like to hone in on specific desires that drive people to their greatness. We are all driven by something within us to be better in a specific area. What would you say that desire is for you?
I think it's a desire to be free. I think that's what it is. Originally, the first way that expressed itself, the desire to be free, was making money. I said, hey, if I make money, then I'm free. I'm free to spend what I want, and I'm free to buy what I want and do what I want. I didn't have, no one can control me because I'm making my own decisions. But eventually there's, you find other ways that you're not free. Okay, so I'm free to spend what I want, but am I really free to be who I want? And there's different layers and levels to freedom. And there's a freedom to be able to get up in front of a room and share your story. And there's a freedom in, being able to, I got a message from a friend of mine who's been struggling with, sex addiction and some questions around his sexual identity and stuff like that and how it plays out in dating. And it's something that he's always kept to himself. Mm-hmm. And he shared with me, actually, just on the way here this morning, he shared with me that he feels comfortable speaking about that when he's dating now. Early on, hey, this is where I am, this is who I am, this is my story. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, it doesn't always guarantee a relationship with the other person. At least I can have a relationship with myself. So there's certain freedom. So my desire today is liberation and freedom for myself and for others.
That's great. And you do that, I'm assuming, through your Adama retreats, through having the House of More available for people to discover their own journeys as well? Correct, yeah.
Yeah, to find their freedom in whichever way it is. Right. It's for someone, this may not be freedom at all, right? To get up and speak. If someone had to do that, that's not freedom. So it's whatever it looks like for that person. But there's many prisons we create. We create prisons of the mind. Religion for many people it's become a prison for them. For other people, that's their greatest liberation, that they could, serve God in the way they want to. So again, a lot of things go back to our intention. But that's the intention behind all of my work for years has just been freedom. Can we liberate ourselves from our stories of being sexually abused? Can we liberate ourselves from our addictions? Can we liberate ourselves from shame? There's a lot of things, like I said.
Yeah, and what I love about the word freedom is that there's so many layers to us. So even if someone has gone through some kind of trauma or experience in their lives and they feel, okay, I've healed, I've moved on, we don't know what's going to trigger something from the past in the future. And there's always, I think as long as we're always open to experiencing more freedom, what more do I have to do to lean into it, to find my freedom in different ways? I think that leads to so much greatness. And I love that you're just perpetuating that in the world.
Yeah, I believe it's an infinite game. There's no there's no magic destination that we're getting to, and everything is
for sure
is sorted out. Mm-hmm. If the creators of chess can create a game that's infinite, basketball is infinite, I'm sure God can make our personal game infinite. Absolutely.
If any of my audience members want to reach out to you directly, how can they do that?
So I'm on Instagram, Eliyahu_Nash. That's probably the way most people reach out to me. If they're interested in any of the specific things, like InSearchOfMorePodcast.com, I'm on there, the podcast on YouTube, on Spotify, and everything else. They want to see what we're doing. House of More as well, also on Instagram and connected to the In Search of More podcast. And the Adama Retreats, adama.com, AHDAMA. So if someone wants me, they will find me.
Okay. And if they want to join any of your retreats, they just go on adama.com, you said?
Yeah,
and
apply.
They can see the schedule.
Yeah, apply. Let's make sure they're a right fit. That's a big part of it, is curating the right group. One person can throw off a lot, so we want to make sure we're putting the right group together. And if they're the right fit, we'd love to have them.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining today's podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And best of luck for everything you do. What a great episode. Thank you for being here. I truly, truly appreciate you. I'd love for you to tap 5 stars and let me know what resonated. Be sure to connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn under my name, Devorah Goldberg. That's where I give you more content. That's where we're able to engage even further. Until next episode, stay safe and be well.